Picture this. A plane full of schoolboys is being evacuated from a war-torn country. It crashes on a remote, uninhabited island. No adults survive, no radios, no rescue plan. Just dozens of British boys, ages 6 to 12, alone on a strip of jungle and beach in the middle of an ocean. Nobody's watching. If you grew up on adventure stories, you already know how this goes. The boys build a treehouse. They form a scrappy little society. They learn to fish, keep a fire going, look out for each other, and eventually get rescued, having grown braver, kinder, and wiser for the experience. That's the story literature had been telling for 100 years before this book existed. William Golding read those stories too. And then he sat down and asked himself a much colder question. What would actually happen? Not the version we tell children to make them brave. The real version. What happens when you strip away parents, teachers, police, and every adult structure holding a child's behavior in place? And just wait? The answer he wrote down in 1954 is called Lord of the Flies. It's short, it's brutal, and more than 70 years later, it's still one of the most assigned, most debated, most quietly disturbing books in the entire English curriculum. Let's go inside it. Golding sets his story during an unnamed, unspecified war. Most readers read it as a stand-in for the Cold War, or a future extension of World War II, since Golding was writing in the shadow of both. A plane carrying a group of British schoolboys, evacuated from the fighting, is shot down. The wreckage disappears. The boys who survive find themselves alone on a lush, uninhabited tropical island. Fresh water, wild pigs to hunt, coconuts, a mountain, a lagoon, a long white beach. In a lot of ways, it's paradise. That's part of the point. This isn't a hostile, freezing wilderness that forces the boys into survival mode. It's abundant. They have almost everything they need to live comfortably. What they don't have is anyone telling them what to do. Two boys find each other early. Ralph, fair-haired, athletic, instinctively likable, the kind of boy other kids naturally follow. And Piggy, overweight, asthmatic, wearing thick glasses, sharp-minded but socially awkward, the one who gets mocked before he even opens his mouth. Piggy spots a large spiral seashell in the lagoon, a conch, and tells Ralph to blow into it like a horn. The sound calls every surviving boy on the island out of the jungle and onto the beach. That single object, the conch, becomes the founding symbol of the entire novel. Whoever holds it has the right to speak, and everyone else has to listen. It's democracy, in the form of a shell. At that first assembly, the boys do something almost touchingly civilized. They hold an election. Ralph is voted chief, mostly because he's the one holding the conch and because he simply looks the part. Golden-haired, calm, likable in that effortless way some kids just are. His main rival is Jack Merridew, the head of a boys' choir who marched out of the jungle in formation, still in his black choir robes, clearly used to being obeyed. Jack loses the vote but is given control of the hunters, the boys responsible for tracking and killing the island's wild pigs for meat. It seems like a reasonable compromise. It will turn out to be the single most consequential decision in the entire book. From this first chapter, Golding is already building his central architecture. Ralph represents order, structure, and the long-term good of the group. The idea that if they keep a signal fire burning on the mountain, a ship might see the smoke and rescue them. Piggy represents intellect and reason. The boy with no charisma, but all the good ideas nobody wants to credit him for. And Jack represents something else entirely. Appetite, dominance, the thrill of the hunt, the pleasure of being obeyed rather than elected. At the start, these three forces coexist under one fragile system. The entire novel is the story of that system failing, piece by piece. The early chapters look almost like the adventure story Golding is deliberately subverting. The boys explore the island. Ralph, Jack, and a quiet, sensitive boy named Simon climb toward the mountain and spot a wild pig, though Jack freezes and can't bring himself to actually kill it with his knife. Not yet. There's an assembly. There are rules. There's the beginning of a signal fire, using Piggy's glasses to concentrate sunlight and ignite the wood. since Piggy is the only one who thought to bring them and the only one with a scientific understanding of how they work. But almost immediately, cracks appear, and they appear in exactly the places you'd expect if you were paying attention to human nature rather than adventure fiction. The younger boys, the little uns, as they're called, start whispering about a beastie, some kind of monster they've seen or dreamed about in the jungle at night. The older boys dismiss it publicly and are quietly unsettled by it privately. Fear, once introduced into a group with no adult to reassure them it isn't real, doesn't go away. It just goes looking for a shape to attach itself to. Meanwhile, the practical business of survival starts exposing the fault line between Ralph and Jack. Ralph wants everyone focused on the signal fire and on building shelters. Boring, unglamorous, essential work. Jack wants to hunt. Hunting is exciting. It has stakes, danger, blood, triumph. It also tellingly gives Jack and his hunters permission to paint their faces with colored clay and charcoal, ostensibly as camouflage for stalking pigs. But Golding is explicit about what actually happens the moment a boy puts on a mask. He stops being accountable for what's underneath it. The mask was a thing on its own, behind which Jack hid, liberated from shame and self-consciousness. That line does enormous work in this book. Painted faces aren't a hunting technique. They're permission. Golding is telling you quietly in Chapter 4 exactly what mechanism is going to destroy this society. Not lack of intelligence, not lack of rules, but the simple discovery that anonymity dissolves conscience. The fire goes out at a critical moment because Jack's hunters, supposedly tending it, abandon their post to chase a pig, right as a ship passes on the horizon. A ship that might have seen the smoke and rescued everyone. It doesn't. Ralph is furious. Jack, having finally killed his first pig, is euphoric, high on the thrill of the hunt, and barely registers what was lost. This is the first moment the two boys' priorities collide in a way that can't be smoothed over, and it's the first real fracture in the group's fragile unity. Here is where Golding starts pulling the psychological floor out from under the reader. The younger boys' fear of the beast spreads and hardens into something the older boys can no longer laugh off, especially after a genuinely eerie nighttime incident. A dead parachutist, killed in an aerial battle far above the island, drifts down and gets tangled in the rocks near the mountaintop, his parachute lines making the corpse a jerk and sway grotesquely in the wind whenever a gust hits it. Two boys keeping watch on the signal fire see this shape moving in the darkness and flee in terror, convinced they've seen the beast with their own eyes. Nobody climbs up to check closely. The story spreads. By morning, the entire island believes, with total conviction, that a monster lives on the mountain. This is one of the most devastating pieces of dramatic irony in the whole novel. The beast everyone fears is genuinely real, physically present on their island, exactly where they say it is. But it's not a monster. It's the wreckage of the adult world's war, literally fallen out of the sky onto their doorstep, and none of them are willing to look closely enough to understand what they're actually looking at. Golding is not being subtle here, even if it takes most readers a chapter or two to catch it. The real beast isn't on the mountain. The war that put these boys on this island in the first place is the beast. It followed them. The fear of this imagined monster becomes the single most useful tool Jack has ever been handed. A frightened group is a group that wants a strong protector more than it wants a fair leader. Jack begins openly mocking Ralph's authority, mocking the value of the signal fire, promising the group that he and his hunters can protect them from the beast in a way Ralph's rules never could. At a chaotic assembly, Jack challenges Ralph directly for leadership. Ralph technically wins the vote again, but Jack, humiliated, simply walks off into the jungle, inviting anyone who wants meat and fun and no rules to come with him. Nearly all the older boys go. This is the moment the island's single, fragile civilization splits into two. Ralph is left with a shrinking handful of loyalists. Piggy, the twins Sam and Eric, who are so inseparable the other boys just call them Samnerick, and a few of the little uns too young to make the choice for themselves. Jack takes almost everyone else to form his own tribe at a rock fortress on the far side of the island, where he rules not through election, but through fear spectacle, and the promise of meat. And then Simon happens. Simon is the quietest, strangest boy in the group, prone to wandering off alone into the jungle, having what read almost like visionary or spiritual experiences in a secluded glade full of butterflies. He's the one character in the novel who seems to intuitively understand something true rather than something convenient. During one of Jack's hunts, the boys kill a sow and, in a moment of ritual bravado, mount its severed head on a sharpened stick as an offering to the beast, to appease it, the way you might leave an offering for an angry god. Flies gather on the head almost immediately. This gruesome trophy is the novel's title object, the Lord of the Flies. It's a literal translation of Beelzebub, an old name for the devil, and Golding places it at the exact center of the book, both structurally and thematically. Simon, alone in the glade, has a hallucinatory, feverish encounter with this severed pig's head, and in the novel's most explicitly symbolic passage, the head seems to speak to him. Not with sound, exactly, but with a kind of internal, undeniable certainty. It tells him there is no monster out in the jungle to hunt and kill. The beast isn't a creature you can spear. Fancy thinking the beast was something you could hunt and kill, it tells him. You knew, didn't you? I'm part of you. The beast is inside them. It always was. It's the thing that painted their faces and picked up the spears in the first place. Simon understands, in that moment, something none of the other boys have been able to face, that the parachutist's body on the mountain is not a monster, and that the real danger was never coming from outside the group at all. Desperate to tell everyone the truth before more damage is done, he stumbles down the mountain in the dark, straight toward Jack's camp, where the boys, whipped into a frenzied, drumming, chanting ritual dance, mistake his shape emerging from the jungle darkness for the beast itself. What happens next is the moral center of the entire novel, and Golding refuses to let you look away from it or soften it. The boys, not just Jack's followers, but Ralph and Piggy too, who have wandered over and gotten swept into the chant and the rhythm of the dance, surround Simon, screaming, and beat him to death with their bare hands and sticks, genuinely believing, in the frenzy of the moment, that they are killing a monster. It's only afterward, in the horrified silence, that some of them begin to understand what they actually did. Golding doesn't give you a villain to blame here. That's the point. Ralph was there. Piggy was there. The good boys participated in this killing every bit as much as Jack's tribe did, because in a crowd, in a chant, in the dark, with fear running the show, the line between civilized and savage turns out to be a lot thinner and more porous than any of them, or any of us, would like to believe. From here, the novel's collapse accelerates fast. Jack's tribe raids Ralph's dwindling camp at night, not for food, but specifically to steal Piggy's glasses, the only working fire-starting tool left on the island, which Jack now wants for his own hunting fires rather than any signal for rescue. Piggy, half-blind without them, insists on confronting Jack's tribe directly to demand the glasses back, still clinging, almost heartbreakingly, to the idea that reasoned argument and fairness still mean something on this island. He holds the conch as he speaks, invoking its old authority one last time. It doesn't matter anymore. A boy named Roger, a quiet, unsettling presence throughout the book, someone who has been edging closer to real cruelty since the beginning, throwing stones near the younger boys just to watch them flinch, climbs above the group at Castle Rock and, without a word of warning, levers a massive boulder loose and sends it crashing down onto Piggy. It kills him instantly and shatters the conch into 100 pieces in the same motion. Golding times this with brutal precision. The last voice of reason and the last physical symbol of democratic order are destroyed in the exact same second by the exact same act. Ralph, now completely alone except for the twins, who are quickly captured and forced, through torture and terror, to join Jack's tribe, becomes the hunted. Jack's group sets out after him with sharpened sticks, hunting him exactly the way they once hunted pigs, chanting the same ritual chant. In desperation, they set the entire island on fire to try to smoke him out of hiding, not caring, or perhaps not even registering, that they are destroying every remaining resource the island has to offer, all in service of killing one boy. Ralph runs for his life across the beach, exhausted, terrified, certain he is about to die, and stumbles, quite literally, into the boots of a British naval officer whose ship spotted the enormous column of smoke from Jack's wildfire and came to investigate. The irony here is total, and Golding wants you to feel every inch of it. For the entire novel, maintaining the signal fire, the responsible, civilized, cooperative thing to do, was the one task that could have saved them, and it was constantly neglected, sabotaged, or abandoned. In the end, the boys are rescued not because they did the right thing, but because their descent into savage violence became so total and so uncontained that it accidentally produced a fire large enough to be seen from the sea. Civilization doesn't save them. Chaos, ironically, does, by being loud enough. The officer, seeing a group of filthy, half-naked, war-painted children, some of them armed with sharpened sticks, mid-manhunt for one of their own, is embarrassed more than horrified, the way an adult might be embarrassed to catch children playing an overly rough game. He makes a light, almost dismissive comment about British boys being able to put on a better show than this. He has absolutely no idea what he actually just interrupted. And that gap between what the reader knows happened on this island and what this adult authority figure assumes happened is Golding's final, devastating joke. Because this officer, representing the same civilized adult world that was supposedly rescuing these boys from their own savagery, has just come from commanding a warship. He is, at this very moment, part of a war. The grown-up world isn't actually less savage than the island. It's just better organized, better funded, and better at hiding it behind uniforms and rank. Ralph, faced with rescue, faced with survival, doesn't feel triumphant. He breaks down completely and weeps, not from relief, but, in Golding's own words, for the end of innocence, the darkness of man's heart, and the fall through the air of the true, wise friend called Piggy. He's not crying because it's over. He's crying because he now knows something about human beings, including himself, that can never be unknown again. Lord of the Flies is often taught as a simple morality tale. Civilization good, savagery bad. Don't let the group think for you. And there's truth in that reading. But Golding's actual target is much more uncomfortable than a simple warning about mob mentality. His real argument is that civilization is not the opposite of savagery. Civilization is a thin, deliberate, constantly maintained structure built specifically to contain something that is already inside every human being, at every age, in every context, including, maybe especially, in children who we like to imagine as innocent by default. Golding wrote this book in direct, furious response to a much older, cheerier adventure novel called The Coral Island, in which shipwrecked British boys behave heroically, cooperate instinctively, and triumph through good old-fashioned decency. Golding, who served in the Royal Navy during World War II and took part in the D-Day landings, had seen firsthand what adult human beings, supposedly the finished, civilized version of these boys, were capable of doing to each other on an industrial scale. He didn't believe the Coral Island version of human nature for 1 second. Lord of the Flies is his rebuttal, not what would actually happen, phrased as an open question. But here is what I believe actually happens, phrased as something closer to a prophecy. Notice how deliberately Golding assigns each major character a role in this argument. Ralph is democratic leadership, imperfect, occasionally distracted, but genuinely trying to serve the group's long-term interest. Piggy is reason and science, mocked and physically weak, valuable exactly to the extent people are willing to actually listen to him, which turns out to be not very much once fear enters the picture. Jack is not simple villainy. He's the far more dangerous combination of charisma, appetite, and the specific pleasure certain people take in being obeyed rather than persuaded. And Roger, quiet and easy to overlook for most of the book, represents something even darker than Jack. Cruelty, completely unmoored from any ideology or justification at all. The purest, coldest form the beast takes once every social restraint keeping it in check has been removed. The conch shell, the signal fire, the assemblies, The votes. All of it is civilization in miniature, built from scratch by children with no instruction manual. And Golding wants you to watch, in real time, exactly which pieces of that structure survive contact with fear, appetite, and the absence of consequences, and which pieces don't. Spoiler: almost none of it survives, and the boys who dismantle it aren't cartoonish monsters. They're ordinary children, doing something ordinary children have always been fully capable of doing the moment nobody is watching and nothing is at stake. The most unsettling thing about Lord of the Flies isn't the violence itself. It's how ordinary and how gradual the descent feels from the inside of the story. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to become a murderer. It happens one face paint session, one abandoned signal fire, one thrilling hunt, one dehumanizing chant at a time. Each step small enough to seem forgivable in the moment it happens. Golding isn't telling you that children are secretly evil, or that society is a fragile joke waiting to collapse the second the lights go out. He's telling you something both smaller and far more permanent. That the difference between a functioning society and a savage one is not a difference in the people involved. It's a difference in the structures those people agree, moment to moment, to keep maintaining. The fire, the conch, the vote, the willingness to actually listen to the unpopular kid holding the good idea. Take those structures away, even briefly, even among children on a beautiful sunlit island. And Golding's argument is that you don't find some deeper, purer human goodness underneath. You find exactly what was there the whole time, waiting behind the mask. If this breakdown helped the story click for you, subscribe. We're going through the books your teacher assigned, but nobody actually explained. Next up, a novel about a man on trial for a crime nobody will name, in a courtroom that was inside him the entire time. See you there.